All right, today we're jumping into something pretty unconventional. It's a philosophical argument that totally flips the script on how we think about life, especially when it comes to the complex topic of abortion. It all starts by asking us to look at the fetus in a completely different way.
So let's just dive right in with the question at the heart of this whole thing. It's a wild one. Is a fetus a house, or is it a life? I know, it sounds strange, but stick with me because this one question is the key to understanding everything else we're about to cover.
Okay, so before we can even begin to unpack that big question, we have to get on the same page as the author. See, it all comes down to definitions. We need to understand exactly what this text means when it talks about life. And here is the first big twist. According to this source, a fetus, well, it isn't actually a life, not yet anyway. The text describes it as more of a structure. Think of it like a house, carefully built over months, just waiting for someone, or something, to move in.
To really hammer this point home, the author uses a pretty striking analogy. They ask, why isn't a fertilized egg considered a life? And their answer is that, kind of like a car or a train, it doesn't have its own autonomous consciousness. From this point of view, that consciousness is the real dividing line between just a vessel and an actual life.
So this leads us to the next obvious step in this whole line of thinking. If the fetus is the house for life, then you got to ask, who's moving in? And here it is, stated as clearly as possible. The source says, a fetus is not a life, but a house for life to live in. This single idea, this one distinction, is the absolute foundation for the entire argument. Which brings us to the actual move-in process. The source calls this tutai. You can think of it as entering, the moment the soul literally moves into its new home. So what is totai? Well, it's defined as this very specific event where a spiritual body, a soul, takes up residence in the now fully built fetal house. It's not a gradual thing, it's a distinct moment in time. And this is where the argument makes its biggest claim. Life, according to this text, does not begin at conception. A being can only truly be called a life after a soul has completed this act of totai and entered the body.
Now that obviously begs the most important question of all, right? If the soul's entry is what kicks everything off, then we have to know, when does this actually happen?
Let's just hang on that question for a second. Based on this whole house and move-in idea, when do you think this event takes place? Early on? Midway through?
Okay, let's look at the timeline, because it's way more specific than you might think. The text claims that for basically all 9 months, the house is just under construction. The actual window for the soul to move in only opens up in the final 10 days before birth. And it gets even more precise than that. Yeah, the move-in window is 10 days long, but the author claims that the vast majority of souls, the moment of totai, happens within the final 3 days before labor starts. So now that we have this whole framework laid out, the fetus as a house, the soul arriving super late in the game, we can see how the author applies all this to completely reframe the debate around abortion. The conclusion follows a pretty clear, logical path. First, a fetus is just a house, not a life. Second, the soul only moves into that house in the last 10 days. So the conclusion is that any abortion before that point isn't the termination of a life, but, in their view, the dismantling of an empty house. And based on that logic, the author makes a very direct challenge to some major religious viewpoints. I'm going to quote this directly from the source. The view from religions like Christianity and Buddhism that abortion is a crime, is a sin, is wrong, and does not conform to the facts. Now, as we get to the end here, the text does something interesting. It pivots. It moves away from the pure philosophy of it all and leaves us with one last very practical and very challenging question.
Yeah, the whole argument shifts gears. It's no longer just about defining what life is. It's about the real-world consequences and asking who is morally responsible for those consequences.
And here it is, the final challenge the text leaves us with. It asks, directly to those who oppose abortion, if you don't allow abortion, can you bear the responsibility of raising the child? It's a powerful question that pushes this whole debate beyond the philosophical and right into the very real, tangible world of accountability, leaving us all to think about where that responsibility really lies.